I'm Sophia Bennett. I'm 32 years old. I'm a graphic designer in Denver, Colorado. And this morning, I woke up to 29 missed calls from a number in Illinois. I stared at my phone so long my coffee went cold in my hand, because deep down, before I even listened to a single voicemail, I already knew who it had to be. Some memories do not fade with time. They wait. They sit quietly in the dark corners of your life until one ordinary morning they rise up and drag you all the way back. For me, it was one sound, one number, one flashing screen, and suddenly I was 12 years old again, standing alone inside Union Station in Chicago, watching the only people who were supposed to protect me turn my fear into entertainment. My mom left me at a train station as a joke. They laughed. They actually made a bet over whether I could find my way home on my own. I can still remember the way my stomach dropped when I realized they weren't coming back after me. The way every face in that station looked unfamiliar. The way the whole city felt too big, too loud, too cold for a little girl with almost no money in her pocket. That was the day everything in my life split into two versions. The girl I had been before that moment, and the person I had to become after it. I never went back. Not that night, not the next week, not ever. I built a different life, a different name, and a future so far from them that most days I could almost believe they no longer existed. But this morning, those 29 missed calls proved something I had spent 20 years trying to bury. The past does not always stay where you leave it. Sometimes it comes looking for you. Hey, does the weather where you are feel perfectly in tune with your current mood right now? Growing up in Willow Creek, Illinois, taught me very early that appearances meant everything in my family. To our neighbors, we looked solid and respectable, the kind of middle-class American family people pointed to when they wanted to talk about hard work and good values. My parents owned a small but successful chain of home goods stores, the kind of places that sold kitchen mixers, bedding, discount coffee makers, and every random household item people forgot they needed until they walked past a bright display. On weekends, my father grilled in the backyard, my mother waved at people across the fence, and everyone acted like we were building the kind of life other families should admire. But inside the house, love was always tied to performance, and safety depended on whether my mother was bored enough to invent another lesson. She loved calling them lessons. That was her favorite word. If I cried, I was too sensitive. If I asked for help, I was helpless. If I forgot something, I needed to learn responsibility. She could turn any normal childhood mistake into a reason to humiliate me, and my father always backed her up with a grin, like cruelty was some kind of team sport they both enjoyed. When I was 8, I asked for a pair of sneakers at the mall because my old ones were falling apart at the toes. My mother told me I was acting spoiled, marched me to a bench near the food court, and said if I wanted to live in the real world, I could start by sitting there alone and learning that nobody owed me anything. They left me there for almost 3 hours. I remember staring at the pretzel stand, smelling cinnamon and butter, trying not to cry because every time I cried, it seemed to entertain them. When they finally came back, my father laughed and asked my mother if she owed him $20 because he had guessed I would still be sitting in the same spot. When I was 10, I cried after a youth football game because a group of boys from school had mocked me in the parking lot, and instead of comforting me, my parents drove to the far side of the stadium lot, told me to get out, and left me there after sunset because, according to my mother, tears made people weak, and weakness attracted worse treatment. I sat on a concrete curb with my arms wrapped around my knees, watching trucks pull out one by one until they came back nearly an hour later with fast food for themselves and no apology for me. My father thought it was hilarious that I was still there. He said he had bet I would try to hitch a ride home or beg strangers for help. That was the pattern. Everything became a test. Everything became a joke at my expense. Everything became a way for them to prove that the world was hard, as if I needed them to harden it further. The strangest part was that they never thought of themselves as cruel. They talked about character and grit and preparing me for reality. They used big words to make ugly things sound noble. If anyone had asked them, they would have said they were raising an independent daughter. But independence was not what they were building. Fear was. Hypervigilance was. Silence was. I learned to study their moods before speaking. I learned how to disappear in my own house. I learned that if I stayed quiet enough, useful enough, invisible enough, maybe I could move through a day without being chosen for one of their experiments. The only place I ever felt like I existed outside their rules was on paper. I drew constantly. I drew on the backs of receipts, in the margins of school assignments, on cheap sketch pads I bought with babysitting money. I drew bedrooms with locked doors, train windows full of light, women standing on mountaintops with no one behind them. At 12, I could not have explained any of that to you. But I know now that I was trying to draw my way out of my own life. What pushed everything over the edge was something so small most parents would not even remember it a week later. I got a B+ in art. Not math, not science. Art. The one subject that made me feel alive. I was proud of it until I walked through the front door and saw my mother holding the report card like it was evidence of moral failure. She asked how a girl who spent so much time drawing could still manage to disappoint her in the one class she supposedly cared about. My father said maybe I was getting lazy. My mother said maybe I had started thinking effort was enough. That night, while I sat in my room pretending to do homework, I heard them talking in the kitchen, their voices low and amused in the way that always made my stomach tighten. My mother said I needed a lesson I would never forget. My father said he would bet money on that. The next morning, they acted so cheerful it made my skin crawl. My mother made pancakes. My father actually asked me if I wanted orange juice. They told me we were taking a day trip into Chicago, just the three of us. And for one stupid, desperate second, I thought maybe they were trying to reset something. Maybe they had cooled off. Maybe the report card fight was over. Maybe this was the closest thing my family could manage to an apology. I should have known better. The whole drive from Willow Creek to the city felt off, in a way I could not fully name at the time. My father kept the radio loud and drummed on the steering wheel like he was in a great mood. My mother kept turning around from the passenger seat to ask me questions she already knew I would answer carefully. Did I think I was smart? Did I think smart girls were ready for the real world? Did I think life would care whether I was scared? Every answer I gave seemed to amuse them. Every time I tried to stay quiet, they pushed harder. By the time the skyline came into view, I had that familiar feeling in my body, the one that said something bad was coming and I would not be allowed to prepare for it. We parked near Union Station around noon. I had never seen anything that big or that crowded up close. The station felt like an entire city compressed under one roof. People with rolling suitcases hurried past in every direction. Businessmen, families, tourists, college kids, all of them moving like they belonged there. I stayed close to my parents because I did not know where else to stand. Inside the main hall, my mother pointed to a huge pillar near the entrance and told me to wait right there while they moved the car and grabbed lunch. 15 minutes, she said, maybe 20. I asked if I could go with them, and my father laughed so loudly people turned to look. He said I was 12, not 2. My mother leaned close and told me not to embarrass her in public, so I nodded and stayed by the pillar while they walked away. I remember checking the big station clock over and over. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then 45. At first I kept telling myself the parking was bad, or the food line was long, or they had gotten turned around. An hour in, my chest started to hurt. An hour and a half in, I could feel panic rising so fast it made my hands shake. I had $9 in my pocket. No phone, no address written down, no idea how the trains worked. I had never felt smaller in my life. I started walking a few feet away from the pillar and then rushing back because they had told me not to move, and even then part of me was still terrified of doing the wrong thing. The station got louder as the afternoon dragged on. Every announcement over the speakers made my heart jump. Every woman with dark hair made me turn my head. Every second stretched until it felt cruel. Then I saw the car. Through the front windows. Moving slowly past the street outside, I saw our car glide by. My whole body jolted with relief so strong I almost laughed. I ran toward the glass, waving both arms, and for a split second I actually thought they had come back. My father was driving. My mother was in the passenger seat. Both of them were looking right at me. My father smiled first. Not the relieved smile of someone who found a lost child. The smile of someone watching a punchline land exactly the way he hoped it would. My mother rolled down her window and leaned out just enough for me to hear her over the traffic. She yelled, "I bet $50 you cannot even find your way home." Then she laughed. My father laughed with her. He lifted one hand off the wheel in this stupid little thumbs up, like they were congratulating themselves for being clever. Then the car moved on and disappeared into traffic. That was the moment the world changed shape for me. It was one thing to fear they might forget me. It was one thing to suspect they were teaching me another lesson. It was something else entirely to see them choose it, to watch them enjoy it, to realize that my fear was not a side effect of what they were doing. It was the point. I stood there frozen until someone brushed past me and muttered, "Excuse me," and the sound of a stranger's voice snapped me back into my body. I ran back inside because I did not know what else to do. I wandered from one end of the station to the other, crying off and on, wiping my face every few minutes because I was still embarrassed to be seen upset. My parents had trained that into me too. I tried to think of anyone I could call, but there was no one. I tried to picture the route home, but home might as well have been another country. I sat on a bench, then stood up again, then walked in circles until my legs hurt. At some point I stopped expecting them to come back. At some point the waiting ended and the abandonment began. That difference may sound small, but when you are 12 years old, it feels like falling through ice. I spent almost 3 hours inside Union Station after they left me there, long enough for the light outside to begin shifting, long enough for the crowds to thin and fill again, long enough that I stopped thinking in complete sentences and started moving on instinct alone. I stayed away from doors because I was afraid of stepping into the city and getting even more lost. I stayed away from police because my parents had always told me that if I caused trouble, authority figures would make everything worse. I stayed away from strangers because the same people who abandoned me had spent years teaching me that asking for help was weakness. Looking back, I think that was one of the cruelest parts of what they did. They trained me not to trust anyone, then left me in a place where trust was the only thing that could have saved me quickly. The person who finally noticed me was a station employee named Maria. She was in her 50s, with tired eyes and the kind of calm voice that made you want to tell the truth, even when you were scared. She had apparently seen me pass the same row of seats and vending machines multiple times. She stopped me near a hallway leading toward the administrative offices and asked if I was lost. I lied immediately. I said I was waiting for my parents. She asked how long I had been waiting. I said I did not know. She asked if I had eaten. That was the question that broke me. I started crying so hard I could barely breathe. All the shame I had been swallowing since noon came apart in one ugly rush. I told her they had left me. I told her they drove past the station and laughed. I told her my mother had bet money on whether I could find my way home. Maria did not react the way my parents would have. She did not tell me to calm down or accuse me of being dramatic. She crouched slightly so her face was level with mine and said, very clearly, "You are safe right now, and I am going to help you." Security was called first. then transit police. One officer took my statement while another checked the station cameras covering the front entrance. They were able to confirm that I had been standing there for a long time and that a car matching my description had slowed near the curb outside before leaving again. That mattered later. At the time, all I knew was that the adults around me had suddenly become very serious. One of the officers asked for my parents' names, our home address, our store name, everything I could remember. Another brought me water and crackers because I had not eaten since breakfast. When they finally reached my parents by phone, I could hear only half the conversation, but I will never forget the expression on the officer's face. It went from cautious professionalism to open disbelief in about 10 seconds. He asked if they were on their way back to Chicago immediately. Then he went quiet for a long moment, listened, and said, "No, ma'am. Leaving a 12-year-old in a major transit station is not a lesson in independence. It is child abandonment." My whole body went cold when I heard those words, not because they sounded too harsh, because they fit. By early evening, I was sitting in a small interview room with a social worker while a report was being prepared. She explained that because my parents were refusing to return right away and were still insisting this had been a parenting decision, I could not simply be sent home even if they later changed their minds. There would be an emergency placement until family court reviewed the case. I did not understand most of the legal language, but I understood the look on her face. She believed me. More than that, she believed I had not been safe long before that day. I was terrified when they told me I would spend the night with a foster family. I had grown up on stories about what happened to children who were taken away, but then I met Mark and Laura Bennett. They were not glamorous, and they were not trying too hard to seem perfect. He was a photographer with ink stains on his fingers from handling prints. She was a preschool teacher who smelled faintly like lotion and classroom paper. Their house was warm and cluttered in a way that felt lived in instead of chaotic. There was a lamp on in the entryway, framed family photos on the wall, and a dog bed in the corner, even though the dog itself was asleep somewhere in the back. Laura asked if I wanted spaghetti or soup. Mark asked if I preferred the hall light on or off when I went to bed. Nobody yelled when I said I did not know. Nobody made fun of me for crying at the dinner table after taking 2 bites and realizing I was too exhausted to pretend I was okay. That first night in their guest room, I barely slept. Every car door outside made me flinch. Every creak in the hallway made me sit up. But even through all that fear, one thought kept circling in my mind. A stranger at a train station had shown me more kindness in 5 minutes than my own mother had shown me in years. I did not have the language for that yet. I only knew that the world suddenly looked different. And once you see that other people are capable of protecting you, it becomes impossible to keep calling cruelty normal. The days that followed felt like living inside somebody else's life. I went from the Bennett house to meetings with social workers, then to therapy evaluations, then to a family court building downtown where adults spoke in careful voices about my future, like it was both fragile and urgently important. My parents showed up with a lawyer and the exact same attitude they had always had at home. Calm, offended, slightly amused that anyone was taking this so seriously. My mother wore a navy blazer and pearl earrings, as if looking respectable would erase what she had done. My father kept leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, like this was all an inconvenience he would eventually outlast. They did not deny leaving me at Union Station. That was the unbelievable part. They admitted it. They just insisted it had been controlled, educational, necessary. My mother actually said they were trying to build resilience. My father said children in this country had become too soft, and somebody needed to teach them how the real world worked. I sat across from them listening to this and realized something that changed me almost as much as the train station itself. They were never going to become the kind of parents who understood what they had done. If they had been capable of that kind of honesty, they would have turned the car around before they ever hit the freeway. The court-appointed therapist's report described a pattern of emotional abuse, humiliation, neglect, and escalating endangerment. Those words were not mine, but hearing them out loud felt like oxygen entering a locked room. For years, I had thought my childhood was somehow my fault, because that was easier than believing the people in charge of me were choosing harm on purpose. The report made it plain. This had not been a misunderstanding. It had not been a strict parenting style. It had been abuse dressed up in middle-class language. When the judge finally asked if I wanted to return home while the court monitored the family, I said no. So quickly the answer seemed to shock even me. My mother stared at me like I had slapped her. My father muttered something under his breath about ingratitude. The judge did not flinch. The next phase was supposed to be a path toward reunification. Parenting classes, family therapy, supervised visits, regular reviews. A long process designed to give my parents a chance to prove they could change. On paper, it sounded fair. In reality, my parents treated it like a public insult. They hated the idea of being evaluated. They hated the idea of oversight. They hated that teachers, therapists, and court officers now had access to the private face of the family they had spent years polishing for everyone else. My father complained more about the damage to the store's reputation than he did about losing custody of me. My mother kept saying she would not let the state tell her how to raise her own child. And then, in the most important moment of the entire case, they were given a choice. They could commit to a 2-year reunification program and do everything the court required. Or they could voluntarily surrender their parental rights. They chose surrender. Just like that. My chest did not break in the courtroom the way you might imagine. It went strangely still. I had spent my whole life trying to be good enough to keep them from turning on me, and in the end, they gave me up rather than admit they were wrong. That was the truth that stayed with me longest. They did not lose me because the system stole me away. They handed me over to protect their pride. After that, things moved faster. The Bennetts were already licensed foster parents, and over the following months, they became something else entirely. Mark started setting aside old photography magazines and art books for me because he had noticed how often I drew. Laura would knock before entering my room, which sounds like such a tiny thing until you grow up in a house where privacy does not exist. They learned what foods made me anxious because of old punishments tied to dinner. They stopped asking me to make eye contact when I was upset. They did not demand love or gratitude or instant trust. They just stayed. Steadiness can feel almost supernatural to a child who has never had it. The adoption was finalized after enough time had passed for everyone to pretend the process was orderly, but emotionally it had already happened long before the judge signed the final papers. When I was asked if I wanted to change my name, I did not hesitate. Jennifer Caldwell belonged to a girl who had stood in a station with $9 in her pocket and no idea if she would be alive or dead to her own family by the end of the day. Sophia Bennett belonged to somebody else, somebody with a room of her own, a desk with drawing supplies, a family that did not laugh when she was afraid. I still remember the first night after the adoption was official. Laura put fresh sheets on my bed like she always did on Sundays. Mark left a new sketchbook on my desk, and nobody made a speech about how lucky I should feel. They acted like I had been theirs all along. That quiet certainty healed more in me than any dramatic moment ever could. It taught me that real love does not test you to prove you deserve it. Real love makes room for you before you know how to relax into it. Healing did not happen all at once, and it definitely did not happen in a straight line. People love stories where one act of rescue fixes everything, where the damaged child instantly blossoms the moment she is placed in a better home. My life was not like that. For years, my body still reacted to kindness like it might be a trap. If Laura told me she would be back in 15 minutes after running to the store, I had to fight the urge to stare out the window until her car returned. If Mark was late picking me up from an after-school event because traffic was bad, I could feel panic building so fast it made my hands numb. I hated waiting in public places. I hated being told to stay put. I hated the phrase, "I will be right back." Therapy helped, but it was slow work. The kind that forces you to say ugly truths out loud until your nervous system slowly starts believing what your mind wants it to know. I learned the words trauma and emotional abuse and hypervigilance. I learned that being hurt over and over does not make you stronger in the way cruel people claim. It makes you adapt to danger. It makes you brilliant at survival and terrible at rest. Through all of it, the Bennetts never rushed me. They came to school events, helped with homework, remembered what topics triggered me, and let me keep my bedroom door closed when I needed space. They did not try to erase what had happened. They helped me build a life large enough that it was no longer the only thing defining me. Art became more than escape. It became structure, language, proof that I could make something beautiful without anyone's permission. I poured myself into it through high school, then into college applications, then into every portfolio review and late-night studio session after I got into the Art Institute of Chicago. Moving back toward the city that had once frightened me was not symbolic at first. It was practical. The school was right for me. The program was strong. But somewhere during those years, I realized I was taking something back. The same city where I had once been abandoned became the place where I built myself. I studied graphic design, worked part-time, went to therapy, and learned how to exist around people who did not require me to shrink. After graduation, I took a job in Denver with a branding firm that specialized in small business identity work, and for the first time in my life, I lived far enough away from Illinois that it felt like geography itself was on my side. Denver gave me space, new streets, new habits, new weather, air dry enough to clear my head. Eventually, I started taking freelance clients on the side, then opened my own studio. I built a reputation for clean visual storytelling, the kind of work that helped people say clearly who they were and what they stood for. Sometimes the irony of that was almost funny. My whole career grew out of the fact that I had spent childhood trapped inside somebody else's lies. I met Alex through a friend at a housewarming party. He was a software engineer, patient in a way that did not feel performative, and very hard to rattle. On our third date, I told him I had complicated family history. On our fifth, I told him a little more. Months later, when I finally told him about Union Station, he did not interrupt, did not overreact, did not offer me some lazy line about how everything happens for a reason. He just reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "That should never have happened to you." The simplicity of it nearly undid me. We built our life the same way I had rebuilt myself. Slowly, deliberately, with room for honesty. We got married in a small ceremony with Mark walking me down the aisle and Laura fixing the back of my dress while trying not to cry. We adopted a rescue dog named Max, a mutt with one torn ear and the cautious soul of something that had also been left behind too early. I blocked every account my biological parents ever tried to use to contact me. Facebook, Instagram, old email addresses. I even changed my phone number once after a holiday voicemail from an Illinois line left me shaking for an hour. I did not talk about them, unless I had to. I did not visit Willow Creek. I did not use my old name. Most days I could go entire weeks without thinking of Jennifer Caldwell at all. That was the life I had built by the time the missed calls came in. A good marriage, a studio with steady clients, morning walks with Max, dinners with friends, Sunday calls with Mark and Laura. A life so quiet and whole that sometimes I wondered whether peace always felt this strange to people who had not grown up fighting for it. Then my phone lit up with 29 missed calls from Illinois, and the ground beneath that piece shifted. There was a voicemail. Then an email from an address I did not know. Then a message request on LinkedIn, the one platform I had kept public because of work. That was the detail that made me understand this had taken effort. Someone had been looking. Someone had finally connected Sophia Bennett to the girl they had once laughed at through a car window. I sat at my kitchen counter with the phone in my hand while Max pressed against my leg and Alex watched my face turn white. I had spent 20 years making sure the past stayed buried. Whatever was happening now had dug it up with both hands. The voicemail was not from my mother. It was from my younger sister Hannah. I had not heard her voice since she was a little girl following me through the hallway in mismatched socks, too young to understand why the air in our house always felt charged. Her voice sounded older, rougher, the way voices do when life has pressed hard on them. She said our mother had late-stage cancer. She said our father had suffered a mild stroke 6 months earlier. She said the stores were gone. Not struggling. Gone. One by one, closed or sold off at losses. After the family story I thought had been buried in court records resurfaced in the worst possible way for them. A relative had posted about the train station incident in a local Facebook group after my mother, in a stunning act of hypocrisy, left a comment on someone else's parenting post about how children today needed stronger discipline. That one comment opened the door. Old neighbors started talking. A retired court clerk, who should probably have minded her own business but did not, hinted that the rumors were true. Someone found an old newspaper brief about a custody matter tied to a minor abandonment investigation. Then, a former employee from one of the stores chimed in about what my parents were like behind closed doors. The image they had spent decades curating collapsed in public, fast and ugly. Customers stopped coming. People drove to bigger chain stores in the next town rather than give them another dollar. Church friends went quiet. Civic groups stopped calling. Willow Creek, which had once protected them with gossip and politeness, turned on them with the same tools. Hannah said they were living in a subsidized apartment outside town now. No house, no stores, no standing, no version of the old family left to hide inside. Then she said the line that told me exactly why there had been 29 missed calls instead of one respectful message. They wanted me to come back. Not because they had suddenly become different people. Not because time had made them brave enough to face the truth. Because they were out of options and terrified of dying alone. I asked Hannah why she was calling if she knew I had every reason not to answer. There was a long pause, and then she said, "Because I wanted you to hear it from someone who is not lying to you." She told me she had cut contact too, not years earlier, but recently, after becoming a mother herself, and finally requesting copies of the court paperwork to understand what had really happened when I disappeared from the family. Our parents had spent years telling her a watered-down version, that I had overreacted, that the state had overreached, that I had been manipulated by foster parents who wanted a daughter. Hannah said reading those records felt like being hit by a truck. She looked at her own little boy after that and realized she could never let people like that near him again. Hearing that should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it made me feel tired in a place deeper than anger. She asked if I would come. I said I would think about it. Alex told me I owed them nothing. Laura told me whatever I chose. It had to be for my peace, not their comfort. Mark said very quietly that some people only look for the bridge after they have burned the house down. I sat with that all night. By morning, I knew one thing clearly. I was not going back to save them. I was going back to end it in my own voice. I flew into Chicago 2 days later and drove the rest of the way to the hospital where my mother was receiving treatment. The room smelled like disinfectant and stale fear. My father looked older than I had imagined, smaller too, as if illness and disgrace had finally stripped him down to the ordinary man beneath the performance. My mother still had that instinctively arranged face, even half sick, like dignity was something she could apply like lipstick. For a second, nobody spoke. Then my mother started crying before I had even sat down. Not a quiet cry either. The kind built to pull focus. She said my name. My old one. I corrected her once and only once. Sophia. She nodded, dabbing at her face, and my father said they had made mistakes. Mistakes. The same cowardly word people use when the truth is too ugly to say out loud. I told them no. A mistake is missing an exit. A mistake is forgetting milk at the store. What they did was deliberate. They left a 12-year-old girl in a train station in a city she did not know, laughed while she panicked, and then spent 20 years lying about it to protect themselves. My father started to speak, probably to explain, but I did not come all that way to listen to another defense wrapped in softer language. I told them they had turned my fear into a game, and the reason they were sitting there now without a business, without respect, and without either daughter by their side was because games end. People find out. Children grow up. Truth catches up even in small towns that think silence can bury anything. My mother asked if I could forgive them. I told her forgiveness was not a debt I owed to people who only came looking for me when their lives fell apart. I said the sentence I had been carrying in some form since I was 12 years old. You bet on whether I could find my way home. I did. I just did not come back to yours. They both cried then, but for once their tears did not move me. I was not cruel. I did not yell. I did not insult them. That was the part that surprised me most. Revenge, when it finally came, did not feel loud. It felt cold, clear, exact. I told them I would not be paying bills, managing care, or restoring contact. I told them Hannah had every right to protect her own child from them. I told them my family was in Colorado and Illinois with the people who had actually earned that word. Then I stood up. My father asked if this was really goodbye. I looked at him and said it had been goodbye for 20 years. You are just the last people to understand that. I walked out after 20 minutes and did not look back. In the parking lot, the air felt thin and bright. I stood there with my hands shaking, not from regret, but from the strange release that comes when something haunting you finally has a shape you can leave behind. On the flight home, I thought about the little girl at Union Station, the one who had believed being abandoned meant being unwanted forever. She had been wrong. She was unwanted by two broken people who mistook cruelty for strength, but she was not unworthy of love. There is a difference, and learning it saved my life. If there is any lesson in what happened to me, it is this. Abuse does not become discipline just because a parent uses cleaner words for it. Humiliation does not build character. Fear does not make children stronger. It only makes them older before their time. And walking away from people who hurt you, even if they share your blood, is not bitterness. Sometimes it is the healthiest thing you will ever do. I did not leave that hospital feeling guilty. I left feeling educated by my own survival. The family you are born into can shape your wounds, but it does not get to define your future. Real love does not laugh when you are scared. Real family does not test whether you can survive without them. Real healing begins the moment you stop calling cruelty a lesson and start calling it what it was. And once you do that, you can build a life so honest, so steady, and so full of peace that even the people who broke you cannot take it back.